Afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Jimmy, for those kind words. Really appreciated. So I'm Bradshaw Managing Director of Ebit Business Solutions, and Matt Darkins, also from Ebit, looks after our contracts database software. We're going to be talking today about effective contract management. So regardless of whatever industry you're in, managing contracts is certainly a key area with regards to commercial supplier relationships, etc., etc. We'll give you a bit of an overview in terms of our experience to date, in terms of what we see, the good bits, some of the necessarily not so good bits, and potential ways of working around those and other solutions available on the market at the moment. So a little bit of a grey slide, and I think the greyness is there for a reason. Managing contracts can be very grey within a lot of the businesses that we either work with or see. On a number of fronts really, whether it's understanding what's in contract, which contracts have been signed up to, which ones are in date, which ones are out of date, etc., etc. It tends to be fairly grey, tends to be fairly autonomous, and it's not often that it's top priority within a lot of the clients that we work with and we see. A little bit about us. We're based in Poundbury, which is Prince Charles's favourite little project at the moment in Dorset. We started the business in 2012. Procurement consultancy is our main day job. Our client base now's combined turnover is approaching 40 billion. And in 2016, we launched our own contracts database software. And it wasn't an intentional journey. It wasn't something that we thought of day one when we set the business up. But it became ever apparent that most of the clients that we were working with, and I think they will put a hand up, weren't great at managing contracts. And finding solutions to that wasn't something that was either top of their priorities of things to do. So it made absolute sense that we started to produce a solution, a flexible one that could work for a lot of the clients we were working with. Clients in the background, obviously there's quite a bit of variety in terms of what we do, whether it's retail, whether it's manufacturing, etc.
So just a very quick question for you all there. Do any of you actually have an electronics contracts database already in place? At a show of hands? So about 7 or 8 out of what, 30 or 40, and that's about average.
Okay, so in our experience, what do we typically see? Some of these might resonate with people. I guess the first one is the Excel spreadsheet kind of scenario. And certainly it's not the worst place to be, and it's the most typical scenario that we certainly see when we're working with clients. But certainly that Excel spreadsheet often tends to be out of date. It's not incorporating everything that's live within the business, and it's certainly better than nothing, but it's fairly typical. That's probably the most common scenario that we see with most of the clients that we work with.
Okay, when we start working with a client, one thing we do get directed to an awful lot is the filing cabinet. And in that filing cabinet, we'll actually find very few contracts, and the vast majority of them out of date already. Most contracts, if they are being worked on, tend to be priority only, so the ones that are either business critical or the ones that are deemed to be potential business risk. And certainly on those Excel spreadsheets, again, we tend to find that they're towards the top of the list. Okay, and one thing that we always see is no one really knows when the end dates of their contracts are. So when we go to a company and say, when is your telecoms contract up for renewal, a lot of people will have a very blank look on their face, and what they actually do is scramble through filing cabinets, through stakeholders' desks, through their emails to actually find a copy of the contract, and then they look at the date and discover the issues they've got there.
Some fairly standard reasons as to kind of why that's normal as well. Most pressing reason normally is there's other business priorities, whether that's growth, whether it's new markets, whether it's change of direction, or whether there's just other things that are deemed more important, and which is understandable.
Okay, and people will say there's a lack of time, and that's because they're so busy driving a business forward, looking for new suppliers, nurturing new relationships, that they feel they have their day job to do, and end dates get neglected.
The next one's an interesting one, and we do hear this pretty much all the time, or certainly a lot of the time. There's a question mark about it being a priority, and quite often there's a fairly flat answer to say, well, actually, though, we've never had a problem, have we? And that may be okay from a legal perspective, but actually, when we scratch the surface a lot of the times, what we'll often see is the interpretation of what they might, or what a company might think they're paying with a contract. The reality is actually quite different if you dig out an invoice. Auto RPI increases, etc., etc., etc. Where a contract's being forgotten about, often there's a number of increases that have been applied to that, and they're just not aware at the end of the day.
And throughout businesses, and with staff changes, with department changes, responsibility changes, what you'll find is that there are contracts where no one has any ownership of them at all. It's very much like man and wife looking after the MOT, always expecting the other person to do it, and then they just get forgotten about.
Technology, we've always done things this way. I think, well, everything changes. Electronic contract database is certainly nothing new. They've been around for a while. I think the development of them, though, is certainly improving dramatically. And the days of the Excel spreadsheet will always be with us, but I think for managing contracts, it's probably not the best tool.
Okay, and then if you look at budgets, at the first glance, no company will say that they've got the budget ready to invest in new processes, new staff, new resource, to really look after their contracts. But we'll cover it a little bit more shortly, but no company can actually neglect the fact that they need to look after their contracts. It's very important. So just looking at a few figures, because there's you can believe what we say, but then here's some figures coming from our experiences. So 98% is the number of clients we've worked with that have had a contract auto-renew or roll over without their sign-off or even their knowledge. What this means for them is they find that there's a 4% increase in their costs. So when they're looking at budgets, they actually have no idea what they're paying for many things like telecoms, IT, energy. And the big figure there, 100% of clients we work with have a contract in place that has had description or briefing errors on it. When you're working with an awful lot of suppliers, you may be surprised at the amount of processes you need to go through, forms, internal policies, and the cost just to load one supplier on your system is average at £12.50. And according to the IACCM, the scariest figure out of all of them is the 9%. Because what that is, that's 9% of your turnover is what's wasted on inefficient contract management and the cost to a business. So just imagine what you could do with that extra nearly 10% of your turnover if you had the proper processes in place to manage your contracts.
Obviously, some people did raise their hands to say they've got an electronic contracts database, which is great. For the ones that haven't, there's no need to feel panicked. It's normal. I'd say 9 out of 10 businesses that we work with or talk to haven't got a system in place. It's a case of just very much working with it. So what does good look like? Well, if we start right at the beginning. So I think even if you haven't got an electronic contracts database, there are certain improvements that you can make with the Excel spreadsheet routine or another way of organising things. The first one is to have a centralised location for all documents. You know, it's absolutely key that you know what you've got, where it is, and people have got access to it. Ideally, if it's mobile compatible, at least people who are field-based also have got then access to those contracts when they're out on the road, should there be any disputes or issues that they need reference to.
It's very well having something in place, but you do need to make sure it is easily accessible. There are many things out there that make it very complex and hard to reach your data, and it's very key to have some form of forecasting view of where the risk is in the future.
Staff, so adoption, so you can have the best system in the world, but at the end of the day, it needs people internally within the business to want to use the system, have a system that's simple to use. And actually, the reality is that they then begin using the system as standard. At the end of the day, you know, I think we've all lost count of that fantastic piece of IT software that day one was fit for purpose and it was superb. But things change within businesses, and it's that adoption rate that needs to be key to keep on top of the contracts going forward.
And when you're looking for solutions, look for something that's really, really proactive. It's very well having Wendy and Steve in procurement who know everything, a SharePoint file, Excel. But what if Wendy and Steve go down sick, you've got Excel that doesn't get updated, or SharePoint you don't have access to, then all of a sudden all of your processes fall down. What you need is a system or something in place, even it's Outlook reminders, that tells you when there's actions that are needed on your contract, so whether you're in a termination period or it has expired already.
The other thing is that's absolutely critical is flexibility. And again, you know, what we've certainly seen is businesses might have dramatic changes in direction. They may be bought out, they may go through internal changes, there may be other priorities, etc., etc. The interesting thing was when we first certainly built our system, we trialled it with 20 different companies and we asked them to break it and come back with either positive or negative feedback in terms of what it could do, what it couldn't do. I think we were generally surprised when we got the first level of feedback after 3 months that 18 of the 20 came back to us to say, well, actually it's okay, but I've got nowhere to put my property leases. Can I put my property leases onto the system? When we certainly started scoping it at the beginning, it wasn't something that we'd even thought about. So we'd made those changes, we'd built them in, and yes, okay, now they can put the property leases in there. But what you really ideally need, if you are thinking about going out to market to look at systems out there, is something that is not just that box and that box only. It's certainly something that needs to be fairly interchangeable with your business as your business changes.
Okay, so this is the acid test to see how many of you are actually paying attention. Can anyone tell me as a percentage of turnover what is the average cost of poor contract management? Sorry? 9. There you go.
Okay, so good contract management impacts. So the first one is obviously planning. It will put you on the front foot in terms of if you are fully aware of what's coming up for renewal when. With most systems on the market, it's quite simple to get a really simple to read calendar that quite clearly shows you across multiple categories, stakeholders, departments, what you need to do and when and why.
And what good contract management gives you is time. So rather than a process driven by urgency, necessity, and the demand of something to have now, it gives you a chance to research, look at market intelligence, run tenders, and get the best deal for your business, not just for that moment, but the best deal for your actual business.
From a legal compliance and a governance perspective, obviously it will also put you in a much stronger position. Whether that's if the business is looking to go through a sale at a future date in terms of having a data room that's readily available at fairly short notice, or whether it's avoiding any potentially sometimes quite costly legal disputes. Certainly having all that information to hand will change the landscape.
And working as one business, what you don't want to see is gatekeepers of information and scattered information throughout the business. Having something in place so people can have full autonomy will real benefit your business and give people the chance to drive their roles forwards by having everything available.
And what you'd naturally expect is a positive return when it comes to commercials. Obviously if you are on the front foot, in terms of being in a position where you're aware of what's coming up for tender when, having the foresight to be able to then think about how you're going to carry out that tender, who you're going to go to, and it being far less reactive, commercially it should put you in a much stronger position.
And we've talked a little bit about the internal benefits of having something in place and processes and real focus on your contracts. But there's external benefits as well. So if you're a company that doesn't have anything in place and you're rushing to all of your supplier base, for example, your energy contract to say, I need, because you've got an out of contract rates, I need these rates, I need it now. Relationships become very frayed when really you need the time to develop and nurture those. So one of the biggest benefits will be to nurture supplier relationships by, again, going to them with your market intelligence, negotiating and taking the time to really deal with them. So there's probably a few questions people will be thinking, and we'd like to preempt a few of them. So there will be some of you out there think we just don't have the resource to really look at contracts.
And it's a fair challenge, and some of the clients we work with, I mean, in our experience, our typical client ranges companies that are turning over from 20 million up to 4 billion plus. It's normally the first kind of pushback that we get. And the reality is, though, when you actually look at the time that's been taken up within the business across multiple different stakeholders, managed or trying to manage contracts, and then the adverse time that's taken up afterwards if something goes wrong, it's fairly substantial. In terms of moving to something like an electronic contracts database, there's a little bit of pain at the start in terms of gathering them to be able to load them on, but once they're loaded, then it's pretty much a case of just ensuring that they're being topped up as new agreements come online.
And there will be some of you who maybe are building a new team, you've got new processes in place, and you don't actually feel you're ready for an electronics contracts database yet.
And again, it's a fair challenge, but again, the time is actually fairly minimal. Most companies have got their contracts either within legal departments or on Excel spreadsheets or somewhere similar. The information's there, it's normally a case of having to collate it and pull it together.
And some of you might be a little panicked about the thought of contracts and don't even know where to start.
And again, it kind of alludes back to the first 2 points. It really just is a case of normally general housekeeping.
And of course, the biggest question everyone thinks about is, do I actually have the budget for really looking at my contracts?
And again, the reality is that electronic contract databases are actually not that expensive. And especially when you work it backwards about what the actual true cost to a business is of not managing contracts effectively, the reality is actually it should put you in a much, much stronger commercial position going forward.
And the number one phrase we always hear is, it's just not a priority right now.
And again, I think that's without the insight in terms of what the true position is of actual how contracts are being managed within a lot of businesses and the net effect of what those commercials look like. So one area that's certainly new to us, and many thanks to Kevin and Ian who are here from the University of Manchester today, is a complete new sector for us. When we started talking to Kevin and Ian at the University of Manchester, within the first 5 minutes it was evident that the HE sector was completely different to anything that we'd worked with in the past. Mainly from a user perspective, most of the clients we work with can be fairly substantial from a turnover point of view, but the reality is in terms of the number of people actually using the system in those businesses, it tended to be less than a couple of hundred. When we sat down with Kevin in Manchester, it was very interesting to begin with that actually there was up to 12,000 users. And obviously that's very, very different from the standard system that we had in place. So it's a case of really going right back to basics to say, okay, how do we basically build something that A, is going to be adopted and used by everybody that needs to use it, and B, it needs to be simple, slick and effective at the end of the day. We'll obviously go through kind of the journey that we've taken, but I think it's fairly apt in terms of whatever industry you're in. It's really critical to make sure that you end up with something that's going to be adopted, used properly, and more importantly, be effective and add a lot of value.
So just to take you through a little bit of this particular case study, when we worked with the University of Manchester, we needed to have an end user profile. And as you can see here, it's something that's very, very streamlined, it's very, very simple, and keeping it simple means there's very, very little risk of things to go wrong. So from here, you can search for anything. So if that's a pipette, a book, some cleaning supplies, it will bring up different scenarios for the end user. So that will bring up, please contact this department head or this stakeholder because they want to have a tight control over the process of ordering. It will give the supplier details, should that be okay to contact the supplier directly, or it'll even give a copy of the contract so the person viewing it can make their own decisions about how to proceed. Looking at security, because that is at the absolute paramount, it's now locked by IP registration, which makes it fully autonomous for all the end users as well. So rather than Ian and Kevin having to look through 12,000 different profiles to see what people can use, they can simply log on and look at the details that's pre-installed already. And each user actually builds up their own history and their own profile. So next time they log on, you'll be able to see what you've previously searched for, and you'll even be able to be notified of any changes in contracts going forward as well. But what does this mean for the manager on the go? What does this mean for Kevin and Ian? Firstly, full mobile compatibility. So when they are at home and they think, oh, when's the energy bill coming up, they can look on their iPhone and see what's needed. But there are significant changes as well. So we've loaded all the proc HE code, so they're very relevant when loading contracts. It's a streamlined dashboard as well. So there's quick searches, there's quick links, and everything is on one page, so it's easy to navigate. It's completely customizable, so we've added their logo, their brand palette, which is changeable for every user. And there's a simple contract loading process, again in the effort to keep things a low risk. It's drop-down boxes, it's a few selections, lots of reminders of what you need to complete in order to load a contract. And a new feature is keywords. So a lot of searches, when you use anything from Google right through into internal systems, you'll get a lot of irrelevant searches. So using keywords now, we'll be able to make sure that when people search for what they're after, they're getting very relevant information back. One of the biggest changes is the reporting, because everyone knows data is absolutely key, so you can forecast, you can see the future and where risk can be posed with your contracts. So we've implemented a embedded Microsoft BI. What that allows us to do is offer dynamic reporting. So it can be anything from failed searches to let you know where your contracts there are no contracts, and right through to you'll be able to see what contracts are expiring one month, what month, category, anything you want to report on, we can now do. And it's fully interactive, so it's not just one stagnant screen you have to take the information away from. If you need to see on this screen here what staff member has what contracts, you click on the staff member, everything will change, so you'll see their value, when they're expiring as well. And one great benefit of this is it actually changes with the business. So if you have a special project on, so you're looking at property costs, you're looking at energy for all your different areas, we can very quickly adapt your dashboard to reflect the information you need going forward. And this is the sort of journey we've taken with the Manchester Uni. And as you can see, it's been a very exciting one. So it hasn't happened overnight. We've spent a lot of time working with not only Kevin and Ian from the procurement team, mapping and speccing what they feel, but we've actually gone into university and listened to all the stakeholders. So that's from anyone from the microbiology labs right through to IT and different areas to hear and feel what they genuinely need to build a system that's not just for one team or one department, but it is for everyone. We're going through building and testing, so Ian and Kevin are testing the system, looking at it, finding out where there's holes or what more needs to be done. And then you've got obviously the trial and refining. We're looking to hopefully shortly roll it out and support it.
We've obviously gone through quite quickly, because I think we were quite appreciative that we were the last presentation before lunch. The last thing we wanted was either teas, coffees or food to suddenly start piling down. We're literally on the stand just next to the TV around the corner. Obviously there may be questions, there may be things that you kind of like to ask, but I think the most important thing, there is light at the end of the tunnel with certainly, I'd say a good 60 to 70% of clients we work with, they are in a position where there are other more pressing priorities. And when we do ask about contracts, how they're being managed, how effective they are, the reality is that most of them, probably over 90% when we carried out a survey, actually want to do more. But there's a lot of question marks about how they do it, whether they need to upscale staff, whether they need to upskill. The reality is often though, if you have a solution in place and a simplistic solution that's being used, then the reality is it's actually a lot more simple than you actually think. And that's us really, so thank you all.